Well, hello everybody. Welcome to week 7. Today is all about conflict resolution and tenant relations. Hope that you had an opportunity to rest and to keep cool in all this heat. I am excited to have traveled, had a mini vacation. I am back on the saddle and we are back here today. So let's get straight into the class today. I'm going to share my screen and then we are going to get started. Let's take a look at the syllabus for today. So we are on week 7. Week 7, and we have approximately another week left. So one more class. So today is all about conflict resolution and tenant relations. I'm going to touch on communication strategies with tenants, why that is so important, how to handle disputes and lease violations, as well as dealing with difficult tenants in a professional way. I know that a lot of times when it comes to property management, one of the things that I frequently share is that this is an industry that can be extremely rewarding and it can also be extremely thankless. And there is a way to deal with tenants in a professional way because let's just be honest, people will push buttons, right? You may not always agree. People may not always respect you, but we should always operate and govern ourselves in a way that is professional because that's exactly what we are. All right, so before I get into the segment on today, let us pull up the affirmations. All right, so let me share my screen as I pull up our affirmations, and then we are going to get straight into it. All right, so here are our affirmations that we quote weekly. All right, so I'm going to ask that you unmute yourselves. I'm going to read the first one, and then I'm going to have you to join in Ms. Dunmore and Kay. I choose to improve my life and take steps every day to achieve this goal. Can
I
you read
can,
the next one?
I can hurdle all the challenges that I encounter.
Beautiful. Kay or Karen, can you jump in here and read the next one, please?
I can hurdle all the challenges. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm committed to my education and will prioritize it in my life.
Beautiful. Next one, Karen, please.
I'm proud of myself for pursuing my education.
Beautiful. Uh-oh. Next one, please.
I am capable of achieving my goals.
Yes, you are. And someone read the last one, please?
My hard work and dedication will pay off in the end.
Boom. Yes, it will. All right. So we are talking about conflict resolution and tenant relations. So let me pull up our slide deck for today. And of course, before we finish, we are gonna drop the link for the slide deck. You will receive your weekly material, the newsletter, and then also for today there is a homework assignment. So we're going to drop all those links. We want to make sure that you have that. So give me 1 second as I pull up our material for today, please. And we have approximately 1 week left. You know, I'm always amazed at how time flies. Like it to me seems like we just started and here it is, we have 1 week to go. All right. I am thankful to have had you on this journey with me, or you bringing me on the journey rather, for these 8 weeks. And of course, next week, we're going to discuss your homework assignment that you're going to receive today, as well as the certificate of completion. So we have a lot to cover for today as well as next week. So let me get straight into it. All right, so conflict resolution and tenant relations. Here it is with conflict resolution and tenant relations. This is how we build and maintain strong landlord and tenant relationships, even when problems come up. let me just assure you that there will be a problem. I've been in the industry for well over 20 plus years. And from one community to the next, things are never always perfect. Things are never always the same. And it is important to understand how we resolve disputes, issues, and problems on a professional way. So today we have 3 categories of information that we're going to discuss, and I'm going to cover. I recognize that happy tenants equates to fewer problems. Now, just depending on if you've been in customer service or if you've been around long enough, you may have heard that the customer is always right. Well, I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I do believe in making sure that we are providing outstanding customer service and customer support for our tenants. We want to always treat tenants well, and usually when we treat them well, they treat us well. Now, it's not to say that there are not going to be any exceptions to the rule, because you can do the right thing and still get the wrong results. But majority of the time, when you treat tenants well, they treat you well. They treat the property well. They'll pay their rent. And even if they pay their rent late, they will always pay that late fee. True story before I get into category 2. We have a rental property in South Carolina. This tenant has been in place for, let's just say, in 24 months. The tenant has paid her rent late 18 months. Not only has she paid her rent late, but she always pay the late fee. And so just depending on the type of property that you own or manage, it's always important to take a look at what's happening, because we could have been very rude and angry with the tenant because she always pay late. But at the end of the day, we don't have a mortgage on the property, right? So it's not really hurting us. And we understand that for some tenants, they may not have the finances to pay their rent by the due date. Now, I'm not suggesting that you always make an exception for tenants or always accept that behavior, but where possible, look at how you can keep quality tenants and to see if there are any adjustments that can be made. All right, so the second category is all about that communication. Clear communication prevents confusion. Say what you mean clearly and early. I like to not beat around a bush when it comes to tenants. I like to set the expectations early. Let them know, listen, if you're going to have any issues paying your rent, contact me to let me know. And tenants will usually do it, whether it's a text message, a telephone call, an email. I would prefer to have a tenant who's honest and upfront to say, hey, Carissa or Miss Landlord, I won't have the money on time for next month's rent. My child has a graduation, or I have school tuition to pay, and I won't get paid until after the due date. Just want to let you know that I'm going to pay my rent late, and I'm also going to pay the late fee. See, I can respect that versus someone who will not pay the rent, they won't pay the late fee, and they will not communicate. So we always want to explain the policies, the rules, and the regulations up front so that tenants will understand what their options are. Professionalism, category 3, helps resolve disputes quickly. Staying calm, being respectful. This is how we solve issues a lot quicker. Some weeks ago, I shared how a situation went terribly wrong really quickly for me. I was managing a rental community. In that community, I think it may have been 372 doors in that community. And it was during a time when my father had passed away. My father passed away. Let's say my father passed away yesterday. And then that following day, right? That next day, instead of taking time off to deal with the recent passing of my father, I had the bright idea to go into the office. I went to work, and clearly I was not in the right state of mind. Being the property manager, I knew that I was the CEO of that community, and I did not have confidence in my new staff that I had recently hired to manage the property, right? Like, I just felt like I had to be there because the property was going to fall apart if I didn't show up. So anyway, went to work and there was a tenant in the office. She was talking to the assistant manager that I hired. Um, Now, this tenant was known to talk really harsh and really sharp. I didn't take it personally because I knew that that was the tenant's demeanor. That was just her character, right? And I just knew and understood as well as accepted the fact that this is a young lady who, in my mind, intentionally wakes up on the wrong side of the bed every day. And it was not about Carissa. That's just who she was. Well, on this particular day, I went into the office and she was just being who she is every day. And I ended up snapping on her. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I can assure you that it was not professional. So that ended up going south really quickly. She ended up calling the corporate office to complain. And I expected the corporate office to take into consideration that I have never, ever had a complaint filed against me. I have never, ever spoken to a tenant in a way that was not professional. And I wanted them to consider the fact that my father passed away. They absolutely did not care. And they should not have, because guess what? It's a business, right? And I always say that if we treat it like a business, it's going to pay us like a business. So we should always do things in a way that's done in decency and in order as well as professionally. So we can't wear our emotions on our sleeve. I would strongly recommend, after having that experience, if there's a need to take time off or to step away or to come out of that situation, that is always the best thing to do. All right. So the power of positive tenant relations, keeping communication open and respectful. Again, it minimizes disputes. It encourages on-time rent and lease compliance. When tenants know that they can come to you and report an issue, they are more apt to do what they're supposed to do, even when it may be uncomfortable for them. If you can think back to COVID, right, when everything was shut down, people were not going to work, the country was in an uproar, right? There were lots of tenants who did not pay their rent. They were not going to work, and some didn't know how to communicate. Some were embarrassed that they didn't have the financial means or the ability to pay their rent. And so that is the power of having good relationships with tenants. It prevents complaints from becoming a crisis, right? We never want to deal with a crisis unless it is an emergency. But where we can think of controlling a ship or a train, anything that we are responsible for controlling, we want to be in control of it and maintain control. We don't want a shipwreck. We don't want a train to derail. And so that's the power of having those positive relationships with tenants. Here are some strategies for success as we are talking about communicating with tenants. We want to be clear, we want to be calm, and we want to be respectful. One of the things that I try to do, and it took me, I'll just be honest, it took me a lot of years to master this, because usually when I'm excited, it can be a positive excitement, it can be a negative excitement. I tend to talk faster, right? So I've learned to slow down, Carissa, take a deep breath, count to 10, and then respond. Because if we always have an immediate response or an immediate clap back, we're not responding, we're now reacting. So when we do that, it's showing the tenants that, hey, not sure if you heard the thunder in my background, but it's showing a tenant like, hey, you know what, maybe they're not professional. And we never, ever want to send that message. It's always important to use multiple methods of communicating. Today, I had to conduct an inspection, a follow-up inspection. So I went to a home of a property that we're renting out. The last time I was there, I noticed that the kitchen window was broken. I noticed that the closure on the door, the back door, was broken. The door wouldn't close properly. I noticed also during that last inspection that there was a hole in the floor. So I told the tenant, hey, listen, we're going to take care of these things. I'm going to send a contractor out to make sure these repairs are completed. And by the way, because this is tenant damage, you will be responsible for the bill. We will invoice you. We will allow you to either pay it in a lump sum, or you can make multiple payments, meaning that we would allow them to do like a payment plan to pay the difference. So I'm sorry, or to pay what was due. So I went there today. I knocked on the door. I could hear people in the house, but nobody answered the door. So I just took pictures. I follow up, and wouldn't you know it, after I left, maybe about 10 minutes after I left, the tenant contacted me to say, hey, I saw that I missed your call. I told them that I was there, told them that I was just following up on the inspection, just wanted to make sure that the contractor completed everything and all was well. So they say, yeah, everything is good. I told them, I said, okay, thank you for confirming. I did let them know that I will be back to come inside to actually confirm the repairs are satisfactory. So I took the pictures. I followed up as soon as I got back to the office. I followed up with them. Hey, thank you for speaking with me earlier. As a reminder from our conversation, here are the pictures that I took when I was at the property today. Like, I just wanted to make sure that I document everything. So even if you have a phone conversation, if you have a text conversation, respond in multiple methods. Send an email with pictures, send text messages, and always document the file, because I promise you that conversation will beat anything else, in anything else that you can think of. Conversation, documenting that conversation will be, I'm sorry, documentation will always trump conversation. So although you can, like I said, have that one-on-one, whether it's over the phone or in person, when you document it, it always beat that he say, she say. You want to have it in writing. So that's why we always want to make sure that it's clear. We also want to make sure that it's professional, and always make sure that, like I said, whether you're sending pictures or videos, still send an email. It's okay to send a text message, but I will always follow up with an email, because we have to have something in writing. And if you have a physical file for the tenant, or maybe you have an online file for the tenant, you still want to make sure that you have that communication, because let's just think worst case scenario, something happens at the property and perhaps that tenant has to go to court. You cannot give a verbal conversation to the court and allow them to hear it, right? And give a judgment or make a decision in terms of who's right or who's wrong. But when you have it in writing, that is what you can prove. That's what will stand up in court. All right, so here are some common tenant issues. I've touched on quite a few of these in last week or 2 weeks ago in class. Some typical problems that landlords face that always affect property management. Late rent, where the tenant is not paying their rent on time, because sometimes if there are bills, if there's a mortgage that must be paid on the property, late rent can cause cash flow issues. The mortgage company won't say, oh, Carissa, don't worry about paying your mortgage for the rental property this month because your tenant haven't paid. No, the mortgage company, they still want their money. If you have to pay utilities on a property, if the water has to be paid, if you're responsible for electric or any other bills, the taxes, right? All of those entities and organizations and companies, they still want their money. So late rent is a common problem. Another common problem is property damage. I talked about the tenant who had the broken window. I talked about that same tenant who had damage to the floor, right? Things will happen. Tenants will break or damage rental property. This is a common issue. There will sometimes be noise complaints where other tenants or neighbors are complaining about loud sounds or music or arguing or some sort of domestic disturbance. Another common issue is unauthorized occupants, where extra people are living in the rental property without permission. There's a way to handle all of these issues and even more. When handling disputes, we always want to do it effectively and we want to do it correctly. So here are some steps that we can take to do it. Put ourselves in the listening seat where we are an active listener. We're being empathetic and we want to stay neutral. Sometimes it's easy to listen with the intent to respond. But when we are using empathy or empathic listening means that we are listening with the intent to hear what the tenant has to say. Even if the tenant is at fault, sometimes just saying absolutely nothing, allowing them to empty, allow them to get their point of view out, allow them to express themselves. Sometimes that will minimize a dispute. I know that it can be tough, it can be aggravating, it can be annoying, frustrating, and all of those other feelings that may come attached to a situation where you own the property and a tenant has done something that negatively impacts your rental business, right? But being professional and treating it like a business is our priority. That should be our main goal. And after we've listened to tenants effectively, we want to acknowledge the issue. So for instance, if a tenant say, well, Carissa, we had a party this past weekend and unfortunately someone threw a brick through the living room window and busted out all the windows, right? That's going to make me feel some kind of way because especially if this is a home that perhaps I've lived in. Maybe that was my childhood home, or maybe that home was passed down to me through my family, my parents or something, right? When there's an emotional attachment, sometimes it's easily to get in our feelings or to wear our emotions on our sleeve. But we have to remember that, okay, it's a rental property. Windows can be replaced, right? Acknowledge the issue. Okay, Miss Tenant, I hear that you had a party this past weekend. Someone took a brick through all of the windows and busted out all the windows. Okay, we're going to have someone there to take care of it. It will be a cost. You will be responsible for that bill in accordance to your lease agreement. So you want to always try to be professional. You want to be neutral. You want to be as calm as possible. You may not always, you may not always knock that ballpark. I'm sorry, you may not always knock that ball out the ballpark and get it right, but you want to try as much as possible, as much as as often as I like to say, as humanly possible, right? We want to try at all costs to do it that way. Usually we can work towards that goal. We may not always get it right, but we still try. And then we also want to offer a reasonable solution. We don't have to be mean. We don't have to be evil. One of my pet peeves when it comes to property managers or property owners is hearing how some unprofessional people treat tenants, meaning that a tenant contact them to let them know, hey, I have mold growing out of my, blowing out of my vents, right? And the property manager gets an attitude as if the tenant has done something wrong, right? That's a pet peeve of mine when I witness it or I hear about it, because at the end of the day, it is a customer service business. 100% of the time, it's always customer service and customer support. And then we also want to follow up in writing. All right, so when dealing with difficult tenants, staying professional, not personal, should always be the goal. That should always be the assignment. Stay professional, not personal. Keep our emotions out of the situation at all times so that we can focus on the facts and then we focus on the solution. We want to stick to the lease terms, refer to the lease agreement when addressing issues so that we can always be fair and we can always do things with clarity. Because if we deviate from the lease, sometimes that can put owners in the hot seat. I have seen owners, and I've had clients who initially they were right, meaning that the tenant did something wrong. The owner took actions to take the tenant to court. But somewhere between taking the tenant to court and actually going before the judge, something happened, something shifted. The landlord, the owner did something that put them in the hot seat. They went before the judge, and because they deviated from their lease agreement, the judge dismissed their case. Here's what I like to tell people. You cannot enforce something that does not exist. If it's not in that rental lease agreement, it's usually not enforceable by the court of law. So stick to the lease at all times. And if it's a situation where perhaps maybe it's not in a lease, right? It's not in writing, but you want to make sure that at the time of the lease renewal or before you get a new tenant in, that you change the language of those terms of the lease. That is the best time to do it. But again, you cannot enforce something that does not exist. You want to offer solution and not blame, right? Because remember, I talked about the tenant. I gave the scenario about the tenant who had a party. Someone took a brick, busted out all of the windows. True story. I had a tenant who was renting I believe it was a 2-bedroom apartment. It was in Southeast Washington, D.C. And to this day, now I've been in this industry for a long time. I'm also a certified housing inspector. So I know a little bit about some of the things that I teach, right? But till this day, I still have not figured out how in an apartment, a tenant had her balcony door damaged, destroyed to the point where the whole frame came off. To me, it looked like a Mack truck had run up through that apartment to knock the frame. I mean, like the door, the glass, everything was completely hanging off. To this day, I don't know how that's possible. It's not like this tenant lived on the bottom floor. She lived on the second floor, and everything was just hanging. So in a situation like that, whether it's that extreme or whatever the situation is, we don't want to we don't want to throw blame, right? Like it's your fault that there's a hole in the wall. Well, yeah, we know that. We know that when a tenant moved in a rental property, it didn't look like that. But let's always focus on finding ways to resolve the issue rather than assigning fault. And then we also want to follow up on a regular basis. Keep tenants informed about the progress of their issues, whatever they're facing. So if it's a situation, even if it's tenant damage, or maybe it's not tenant damage, keep them abreast of the timeline that it's going to take to make the necessary repairs or replacements. So if we have to order a part, let's say like now we're in the middle of the summer, right? It's been extremely hot, and it's usually around this time of the year for tenants that their AC may stop working. And perhaps we have to hire a contractor to go out and to fix it. And maybe they don't have everything they need to get the tenant's air working properly. So we just want to communicate, hey, Miss Tenant, we do apologize. The contractor does have to come back. Just let them know how long they have to stay in a situation, let them know if there's anything that we're responsible or anything that we're considering. So in a situation where the tenant doesn't have AC, right? Perhaps we can do something like maybe buy them a fan or some sort of alternative, especially during extreme weather. So whether it's no AC or no heat, just letting them know on a regular basis and keeping them abreast of what's happening helps them to feel really good about trusting you to do the right thing. Handling common lease violations. So I talked about the late rent, and one of the things that we can do, because we always want to be consistent, is to issue written notices. Around the same time of the month, we should be on go to send out notices. So let's say the rent is due between the 1st and the 5th. And perhaps the late fee kicks in on the 6th of the month. We should already have notices, kind of like a template, if you will, prepared to go out to send those reminder notices to tenants. Hey, it's the 5th, it's the 6th of the month. If you have not paid your rent, please do so promptly. Remind them of what the options are to pay the rent. Let them know how much they owe and keep a record of it. And you want to do the same thing each month. When it comes to an authorized guest or an authorized pet, you want to issue a notice of violation, offer a cure period if it's applicable. So meaning that if, let's say, for instance, it is the 14th of the month, right? We go in, remember I said I went to the property today to confirm that the repairs were completed. Now, another thing that I noticed while I was there, because I went to the unit under them and it smelled, I smelled evidence of a cat. Now, I know that the tenant did have cats the last time I was there. They had 4 or 5 cats. Well, the unit below them is vacant. So when I went to the vacant unit, I was able to smell the cats from above, although I had a conversation with the tenant to let them know that their cats were not allowed, or they did not have permission to have the cats, and they were to be removed. So the tenant replied, hey, I know we're not supposed to have the cats. I'm waiting on someone to come and get them. So I reminded them, hey, listen, the last time we had a conversation about the cats, you told me that you were going to have them removed. I smell the evidence of cats. So if you don't remove the cats right away, you will get a notice of lease violation. So you want to give them a period to correct the problem and then follow up. And then also with property damage, you want to document every step. You want to take pictures of everything. Take pictures of the damage. Take pictures of the completed repairs after everything has been finalized, because again, it's not what you know, is what you can prove. And if you have to take a tenant to court, you want to make sure that you have all that documentation working in your favor. All right, so I'm going to pause for a second. We have a few case studies to go over. Let me see who I have. Hey, Ms. Williams, happy Monday.
Hello, Sanya.
All right, so we have 3 case studies. I'm going to assign the case studies accordingly. So let me share my screen again and pull up the case studies. Give me 1 second. All right, so here's the first one. Late rent and eviction notice. So you have to deliver late rent letters and eviction notices to tenants. The tenants are very upset. Here's a question. How do you professionally resolve the matter? All right, so I'm going to assign this one to you, Ms. Dunmore. This is your case study about late rent. All right. As a matter of fact, let's do this. Ms. Dunmore and Kay, I'm going to assign this to you. Late rent and eviction notice. All right, here's another case study. Tenant complaint about neighbor. So you've received multiple complaints regarding a specific tenant who you've already spoken to. The problem has not gotten better. What is your next step? So tenant complaint. All right, so I'm going to assign this one to Miss Williams and Karen. All right, so let me go back. If you can take a picture of it, I'm going to do a breakout session. We're going to take about maybe 5 minutes in a breakout session to talk through it. We're going to come back together and then we're going to share. All right, so Ms. Dunmore and Kay, This is yours here. Somebody please take a screenshot or a picture of this one. Late rent and eviction notice. And then we're going to talk about the tenant complaint about the neighbor, Miss Williams and Karen. All right. Have the assignment. All right, so let's go to our breakout session, and then we're going to come back in approximately 5 minutes to discuss. All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm excited. Let me pull up our case studies so we could hear your feedback. Give me one moment as I share my screen. Okay, so our first case study for tonight is about late rent and eviction notice. So Ms. Dunmore and Kay, you had this one. Please unmute yourself and talk to us, please.
Alrighty, so I think Ms. Dunmore might still be in the breakout room. Oh, there she is. All right, so what me and Ms. Dunmore talked about was, well, Ms. Dunmore was more so focused on the late rent letters, and she expressed that she would try to hear the tenants out, on a professional perspective. When it came to the eviction notices, we both agreed that it would be best that we highlight and emphasize that there are protocols and procedures and policies in the lease agreement that specifically tells the tenant. So, when it comes to delivering the letters, what I would do if I was a landlord, I would highlight a specific section in the lease that talks about violating rent or what can lead to you getting evicted, and then I would put that highlighted part on to the letters. And then I also agreed that it would also show some type of empathy or sympathy, I forgot which one is which, empathy towards the tenant. If you hear them out, hear what they have going on, they might feel like they have somebody who can listen to them, but at the same time, all you can do is listen, because you still have to follow procedures and rules that are clearly stated in the lease agreement.
Okay. I like that. Thank you, Group One. Yes, that is empathy, listening to tenants with the intent to hear, with the intent to listen. Very good, Group One. Awesome job. Okay, Group Two. Here's our second scenario, the tenant complaint about the neighbor. Talk to us, Ms. Williams and Karen.
So, we kind of both agreed that it pretty much depends on what the complaint is, as far as the steps that you had to take, and also, based on the information in the lease agreement. Um, and I know we were talking about, you kind of cut us off a bit, bringing us back. We was talking about, pets as far as the lease goes, and, also, what I mentioned was noise complaints. Because I know that's a big one with a lot of neighbors, where their neighbor is too loud, and depending on how many times you've told them that they had to keep the noise down, law enforcement or courts will have to get involved after that point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great feedback. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's take a look at another case study here. The unauthorized occupant discovered. So you've been made aware that a tenant has 3 extra unreported people living in the rental property. Now, anybody can answer this, so you can unmute yourself and let me know. The problem keeps getting worse. What do you do? Anybody?
It depends, because what is it? Well, I say it depends on the relationship between you and the tenant, um, the renter and the tenant, because the 3 extra unreported people could be either family or somebody that they know that's currently going through a situation that needed a place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So it definitely depends on that situation, but and setting boundaries, um, as far as like how long they can stay. Because I know in some states, well, here in Georgia in particular, after 30 days they become actual, um, what is it called? You pretty much can't evict them after 30 days because they've been there in the home for 30 days. So
Yeah. They become a tenant.
yeah. So yeah, it definitely depends on the situation.
So, and that's a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up in terms of the law in Georgia. And of course, the laws are going to be different in each jurisdiction. So, in other jurisdictions, it may be longer than 30 days, but that's why we have to address issues promptly, because with Georgia law being 30 days, and we are made aware that there are extra people living in the property, we don't want them to stay there for 30 days, because now that would make it harder to have them removed from the property. So when we see something, we want to say something. And yes, we should, we can always address it on a case by case basis. However, it's always good to have a policy in place. So for instance, with me, in my rental lease package, which is at least 61 pages long, no exaggeration, I do have a guest policy. So, for instance, in certain states, the guest policy is 5 days. The tenant, they sign the addendum acknowledging that their guests can stay up to 5 days, 5 consecutive days. And anything over that would be a violation of the lease. Because the one thing that I don't want to happen, and this has happened quite a bit, and this is a normal thing, right? And I'm glad that you gave the scenario, Ms. Williams, that, the scenario, the situation where the tenant may have their family staying there, right? We know that things happen. People are losing their income. People have lost their jobs. And, some people, they're just really trying to do whatever's necessary to make ends meet, right? And if it's someone that we care about, we're close to, we don't want to see our peeps out in the street, right? So perhaps we say, hey, listen, come and stay with me, get on your feet, look for a job, stay as long as you want, right? But the lease agreement says that people can't stay longer than 30 days. So how do we resolve these issues? We do have those conversations and communicate early. I like what Kay said, remind them of the lease violation, highlight that clause. And hopefully, depending on the type of relationship, and this is what you were talking about, Ms. Williams, hopefully the type of relationship that the tenant has with the owner or the property manager would allow them to still have their relatives, their friends, or whoever, their loved ones, stay with them during a time of need. But I would always document it, even if I stretch the policy, if I could, to allow them to have their relatives there, right? And just understanding that, listen, this is definitely not a permanent situation. I understand that this is temporary. They're essentially homeless, and you're helping them out. I would follow it with something in writing, just to acknowledge the fact that it's a temporary situation. So that was great feedback from both groups. Our key takeaways for today: we always want to set clear boundaries. I've shared this and I'll share this over and over and over. Friendly doesn't mean flexible on the rules. Following through on our promises, because when we do what we say, this helps us to build reliability. This is how tenants trust us. We want to offer solutions, not just telling tenants what the rules are. Ultimately, we want to show that we value them because they're human. We are human as well. It's a business, but it's not we don't want to remove the human aspect of what we do. So helping tenants understand why something is required is always important because they may not understand why we have to enforce the rules. They may see it as, oh, you're just angry. Oh, you're just mad. Oh, you can bend the rules, right? So when we explain why we have to do our job, sometimes they don't see through our lens. They don't see things through our eyes, right? They may have just rented a place for the first time, never understanding how important it is to follow the rules of the lease. Keep personal feelings separate. Always act professionally, even in tough situations. All right, so that is it for today's class. We covered quite a bit. Thank you so much for your participation with the case studies. Um, I know that I shared that I was on a cruise, but here's what I didn't tell you on my cruise. So I ended up taking a 3-year-old grandbaby with me on the cruise. And my vacation turned out to not be a vacation. I feel like I need a vacation after the vacation because this 3-year-old had this nonstop energy and required 100% of my attention the entire time. I feel drained. Feel like I could use another vacation. But overall, I had a really great time getting away. I did miss you all last week. And just again, a reminder, next week will be our last week of class. It will be the 8th week. You will receive a certificate of completion. I am going to follow up because I've created a mini course for this class, but I wanted to get through this class first before rolling it out. So I'll share more about that next week, and I'll also send an email. I'm excited to provide this opportunity. I'm excited to share property management. Next week, we're going to touch on roles, jobs, career paths, and so much more, because one of the things that I like to tell people is that when it comes to real estate and property management, this is not necessarily a cookie cutter type of industry. You can take basic foundational information and create a path for yourself. And I don't want to limit anybody to just sticking to managing property for others, right? Because I know that if you don't own property now, some of you will, and will rent it out later. And so I want you to take what we're covering in class, whether it's about maintenance or rent collection or marketing, right? You can create a whole path. You can create a business on specific things in property management because there's so much, right? There's a multiplicity of things that we can cover and we can experience in property management. And so I'm going to touch on those things next week. Of course, if you have any questions, any comments, remarks, or observations, please reach out to me by way of email so that I can follow up with you. Before we wrap up class on today, are there any questions that you have? Anything that I may not have shared or covered? And then also I'm going to have Kay to drop those links in the chat box. Kay, can you drop the link for the newsletter? Can you also drop the link for the slide deck? Now for today, there is a homework assignment. Let me see if I can find that and pull it up on the screen for you. Give me one moment. And Kay, can you also drop that link if I didn't ask already for the homework assignment? All right, so let me share my screen. Let me show you what the homework assignment looks like. Thank you. I see the link being dropped as I speak. So this is the homework assignment. All right. Kay is dropping the link. So today we talked about conflict resolution and tenant relations. So you do have a homework assignment. Here is your homework assignment. As a property manager, handling conflict with professionalism and empathy is essential. It's critical. So your homework assignment is to write a one-page reflection describing a real life or imagined conflict, a tenant and a landlord, or a tenant to tenant will face. Okay, so whether it's real life or you just imagine one, you're just going to simply write a one pager describing it. It should have 4 elements. You want to describe or tell us what the issue is. How would you resolve the issue? What communication methods or techniques would you use? And then, this is a typo here, we'll correct that. That should say 4th element, what outcome you hope to achieve. All right, so that's the homework assignment. You have the homework assignment. Next week when we come back, we're going to start with the homework assignment, and then we're going to get into the class for next week. All right. Thank you so much for showing up today. My time is up, and I absolutely thank you for yours. We are going to send this out. We're going to send the link out as well, which is going to be on the YouTube page. It's been a pleasure having you in class today, and I look forward to seeing you all next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to say bye for now.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.